Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into some source material that is going to completely dismantle how you probably think about success. You know that traditional, hyper-focused, goal-oriented mindset we've all been taught? Well, we're going to look at a fascinating alternative. We're going to explore how microscopic, almost invisible changes are actually the true drivers of massive transformation. Let's jump right in, because this concept might literally change how you look at every single routine in your life.
To really grasp the power of tiny changes, we have to talk about one of the most astonishing turnarounds in sports history. Picture the British cycling team right before 2003. They had suffered through nearly a century of absolute, heartbreaking mediocrity. I mean, since 1908, they'd won exactly 1 Olympic gold medal, 0 Tour de France victories. They were historically so terrible that a top European bike manufacturer actually refused to sell them gear. Seriously, they were afraid it would hurt their sales if other pros saw the British team riding their bikes. Then, a guy named Dave Brailsford steps in as performance director.
Now, Brailsford didn't come in and just fire everybody or demand some sweeping overnight overhaul. Instead, he brought in this philosophy called the aggregation of marginal gains. The whole idea was to hunt for a tiny 1% margin of improvement in absolutely everything they did. And they got incredibly granular with this. They redesigned the bike seats for comfort, they rubbed alcohol on the tires for better grip, they wore electrically heated overshorts to keep their muscle temps up, they even hired a surgeon, yes, a surgeon, to teach the riders the absolute best way to wash their hands to avoid catching a cold. They tested different pillows, and they even painted the inside of the team truck white just to spot tiny specks of dust that could mess with the bikes. Absurdly small adjustments, right?
But what happened when they accumulated hundreds of these tiny improvements? Mind-blowing results. And it happened way faster than anyone thought possible. Just 5 years after Brailsford took over, the team absolutely crushed it at the 2008 Olympics, taking home 60% of the available gold medals. Then they went on to set world records in London and grabbed 5 Tour de France victories in just 6 years. All those ridiculous, tiny adjustments compounded into complete global domination.
So, what does this all mean for us? Well, it totally shatters a myth we all fall for. The idea that massive success requires massive action. Think about it. Whether you're trying to lose weight, build a startup, write a novel, or win a championship, we put this immense pressure on ourselves to make some earth-shattering overnight transformation. We convince ourselves that big results demand huge, exhausting changes right out of the gate.
But the hard math paints a completely different picture. Getting just 1% better isn't going to make headlines today. You won't even notice it. But mathematically, if you get just 1% better each day for one whole year, you end up almost 37 times better by the time you're done. 37 times! Of course, the flip side is that if you get 1% worse each day for a year, you decline pretty much all the way down to 0.
When you map out that divergence over a year, it's staggering. Habits are literally the compound interest of self-improvement. Just like money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. On any random Tuesday, eating a burger or saving a single dollar doesn't seem to move the needle at all. But fast forward 2, 5, or 10 years down the road, the long-term impact of those tiny compounded choices is absolutely enormous.
Think of it like a pilot flying a commercial airplane. Imagine taking off from Los Angeles, aiming for New York City. If the pilot adjusts the heading by just 3.5 degrees south, which is a tiny shift, we're talking moving the nose of the plane just a few feet. You sitting in the cabin wouldn't even feel it, but magnified across the entire distance of the United States, that same airplane is going to land in Washington, D.C. instead of New York. A slight shift in your daily habits operates the exact same way. It gently but surely guides your life to a totally different destination. So here's the million-dollar question. If the math is so undeniably clear, why is it so incredibly hard for us to actually stick to our routines? Why do we start a tough new workout program or try to meditate every morning and then just throw in the towel after a few days? Look, it's easy to beat yourself up and feel like you're failing, but we need to normalize this. We all struggle with it. And the source material offers a brilliant explanation for exactly why this happens. It all comes down to the concept of delayed breakthroughs. Imagine a freezing cold room. Sitting on a table in front of you is an ice cube. You start slowly heating the room up. 25 degrees, 26, 27, the ice cube just sits there. You're putting in all this energy, raising the temperature, but nothing is happening. 29, 30, 31 degrees, still nothing. And then you hit exactly 32 degrees, and suddenly the ice begins to melt. That 1 degree shift wasn't any different from the degrees before it, but it unlocked a massive physical change. Your energy wasn't wasted at 26 degrees, it was just being stored up until you hit that critical threshold.
This brings us to a super important concept, the valley of disappointment. When we start a new habit, we just expect our progress to be a straight upward line. But the reality? The early stages of almost any new quest yield basically zero visible results. It's so frustrating. You think, I've been running every morning for a month. Why haven't I lost a single pound? This valley is where almost everyone gives up. But you have to realize your early efforts are not wasted. Just like the heat in that cold room, they are simply being stored up, waiting for you to finally cross what's called the plateau of latent potential.
The San Antonio Spurs, arguably one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, actually hang a quote by Jacob Riis in their locker room to drive this exact point home. It talks about a stonecutter hammering away at a rock 100 times without so much as a hairline crack showing, but on the 101st blow, the whole thing splits in two. Mastery requires extreme, stubborn patience. You have to trust that the invisible, stored progress from all those previous blows is exactly what makes the final breakthrough possible.
Okay, so if we want to actually survive that valley of disappointment without quitting, we need a major paradigm shift. We have to fundamentally change what we are focusing on every day. We need to stop obsessing over our goals, which are the outcomes or the results we want, and start focusing entirely on our systems. Systems are the actual daily processes that lead to those results.
The legendary 3-time Super Bowl winning coach, Bill Walsh, summed this up perfectly. Think about it. If you're a coach and you completely ignore your ultimate goal of winning the championship, and instead you pour 100% of your focus into your daily system, how you run your morning practice, how you recruit, how you sweep the locker room floor, would you still get results? Absolutely, because, as Walsh said, the score takes care of itself. The only way to win the big game is to actually get better every single day.
In fact, the source material points out that relying on goals actually has some fatal flaws. First off, winners and losers share the exact same goals. Every single Olympian wants the gold medal, right? So the goal itself clearly doesn't dictate success. The system does. Second, hitting a goal is just a momentary change. Cleaning a messy room today doesn't cure the sloppy habits that made it messy in the first place. Goals also restrict your happiness because you're always delaying your satisfaction until you hit the finish line. And finally, they often cause this infamous yo-yo effect, where someone trains for a marathon, crosses the finish line, and then immediately stops running altogether because the goal is gone. The antidote to all of this is a systems-first mentality. Basically, fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves. When you fall in love with the process rather than the final product, you don't have to wait to give yourself permission to be happy. You can feel satisfied and successful anytime your system is running. True long-term thinking isn't about setting goals. It's about entering a cycle of endless, daily refinement. Now, to ground all this theory in some real-world stakes, let's look at the author of the source text, James Clear. When he was a high school sophomore, he was accidentally struck right in the face with a baseball bat. The injuries were horrific, a shattered skull, multiple facial fractures, and he had to be put into a medically induced coma. His journey back from that wasn't achieved through one massive heroic action. Recovering from a severe traumatic brain injury and eventually becoming an academic all-American college athlete was the direct result of stacking tiny, consistent systems. He just went to bed early. He kept his room completely tidy. He lifted weights consistently. Those tiny habits literally saved and rebuilt his life.
So how do we actually build these systems for ourselves? The text breaks behavior change down into 3 distinct layers, kind of like an onion. The outer layer is changing your outcomes. That's things like losing weight or publishing a book. The middle layer is changing your processes, like implementing a brand new gym routine. But the deepest, most powerful layer, that is changing your identity. This is about shifting your worldview, your self-image, and your core beliefs. To make a change stick permanently, we have to work from the inside out.
The huge mistake most people make is that they start with outcome-based habits. They focus strictly on what they want to achieve. They say, I want to be skinny, so I'm going to follow this strict diet. But they never actually change the way they look at themselves. So their old beliefs end up totally sabotaging their new plans. The real secret is building identity-based habits. With these, you aren't focusing on what you want to achieve. You are focusing entirely on who you wish to become. Let me give you a perfect example of how powerful this is. Imagine 2 people are offered a cigarette. The first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Sounds reasonable, right? But they still believe they are a smoker who is just trying to do something else. Now the second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Boom. That is a massive shift in identity. Smoking was part of their former life, not their current one. True behavioral change only happens when a habit becomes a deeply ingrained part of who you are.
And that brings us to the core concept of this entire explainer, atomic habits. We aren't just talking about any old small habits here. Just like atoms are the fundamental building blocks of molecules, atomic habits are the fundamental building blocks of our lives. They're regular routines that are wonderfully small and incredibly easy to do, yet they are the source of immense, life-altering power. They are the essential components of a massive system of compound growth.
So I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. Stop looking at your current results. Don't look at your bank account. Don't look at this scale. Don't look at your job title. Instead, look inward at your compounding micro-habits. Are your current daily habits putting you on a successful trajectory? Because it's not the massive, exhausting, overnight changes that are going to define your future self. It is the tiny, invisible, atomic choices you are making right now, today. Master your identity, fall completely in love with your daily systems, and just let the compound interest of self-improvement take care of the rest.